Good morning. My name is Deb Bowen, and on behalf of the Jewish Federation of the Quad Cities, I welcome you today. Thank you to Alan Ross at the Federation for sponsoring this event, and to him, Stephanie Wagner, and Sandy Yoder, who all serve with me on the Iowa Council for Holocaust Education, for all the help with this event. Since 2003, I've worked on an intergenerational history preservation project between students 18 and younger and the World War II generation. In fall of 2022, I had the privilege of meeting a Holocaust survivor from Canada named Sol Nayman. I introduced him to a farm girl in rural Clinton County, Iowa. Her teacher was her writing coach, and Rebecca lovingly wrote and illustrated Sol's story for future generation. Next, I introduced him to a curriculum leader in Davenport schools. She arranges for him to speak to over 1,000 eighth graders every spring. That's a lot of impact he's made on students in the last 2 years. And here we are today. We'd like to hear about the impact Sol makes on your students, so please email Alan Ross with impact statements. It helps with our grants, and I'll put his email in the chat. I have an exciting announcement to make before we begin. Since there will be no time for Q&A today, if you wish, Sol will come into your classroom via Zoom for a Q&A at a later date. Have your students write their questions down now if you're interested. You can email me, since I'm also dropping my email address in the chat as well. Also, write in the chat if you'd be interested in more Holocaust educators on Zoom. We'd like to know. I'd now like to introduce you to Mr. Sol Nayman.
Thank you, Deb. And it's really a joy for me to be speaking again under the auspices of the Jewish Federation of the Quad Cities, and to welcome Jessica Rhodes, a wonderful person who's going to connect me with some very, very special people. Before going any further, I would like to tell you how I feel about Deb Bowen. And I've said that before. In Judaism, the highest accolade to be identified is as a tzaddik, or a tzaddikah for a woman, meaning a righteous person. Deb, in my book, you are a true tzaddikah, and may your righteousness shine more than ever during these difficult times. In 2016, I returned from Poland for the first time as a participant in the March of the Living. And that later that year, I was invited to speak at the University of Toronto. I began my remarks with a quote from the great Rabbi Hillel. In Hebrew, it's Im lo achshav matai. In English, it's if not now, when. And this became the title of a book that was prepared by Rebecca Lohr, a student from Clinton, Iowa, at a school to which I spoke at the Davenport district. And I was absolutely thrilled that she wanted to reach out and create a book about me. And I'm just simply thrilled beyond words. I was so emotionally overtaken, overwhelmed by what happened with the school district that I decided to send a letter to Governor Kim Reynolds, telling her how impressed I was with the teachers, with the staff at Davenport, and how impressed I was with the students who sent me many, many questions. And I suggested very respectfully to the governor that perhaps Iowa should be added to the 23 states that have enhanced Holocaust education. Some time passed between my time writing that note and eventually that wonderful event happening, as the governor in May of this year actually signed a bill that enhanced various education principles and the Holocaust. And I was thrilled to see that Rebecca presented the governor with a copy of the book about me. And I wrote to the governor telling her how impressed I was with everything. And again, thanked her for doing what she was doing. And she sent me a beautiful note. It reads, "Sol, thank you so much for the kind note. It was an honor for me to sign the bill to ensure our students never forget about the atrocities of the Holocaust. As a Holocaust survivor, please know that Iowans stand with the Jewish people and Israel. God bless you. Thank you for speaking to the students of Davenport, signed Kim. That is a moment in my life that I will treasure forever. So this is my mission in life, to promote Holocaust education and genocide awareness, to inspire Jews and non-Jews alike to become new witnesses, to challenge Holocaust deniers, to oppose hatred, anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination of any kind, to seek and not be afraid of truth, to speak out, to not be indifferent bystanders, as so many people were, to make a difference. And my most important requirement is to learn to love. You know, there are so many things still to be learned about the Holocaust. You know perhaps about Auschwitz or Treblinka or Majdanek, but how about Syktyvkar? Syktyvkar and other forced labor camps in the Soviet Union is where we survived, as did tens of thousands of Jews. 6 million Jews perished in the Shoah, about half in Poland, while 2.5 million were murdered in the Soviet Union in what I call the parallel Holocaust. And for many years, I had a conflict about being a survivor, not having endured the Nazi death camp or not having lived under Nazi occupation. And this changed on a visit to the US Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, who define as survivors all those who were displaced, persecuted, or discriminated against due to the racial, religious, ethnic, and political policies of the Nazis and their allies between 1933 and 1945. So I acknowledge that I am a Holocaust survivor. In fact, the museum did. And I had to make up for lost time. My family at that time urged me to create a memento of my survival. So I wrote my story, which I simply call Zadie's story, the grandfather's story. And I will share some of the elements of that story with you now. I was born on November 5th, 1935 in Stoczek Węgrowski, Poland, or as Jews prefer to call it, Stok, was much easier to pronounce than Stoczek, a little village about 30 miles east from Warsaw. I now am the last living Jew from Stok. I was the second child to Judah Nayman and Sarah Rose Rosenberg. My sister Manya was 7 years older, and this is the only photo we have of the two of us before the war. I was named in memory of my maternal grandfather, in Hebrew it's David Shlomo, or David Solomon. He was a sofer, a scribe of holy works like Torah scrolls and various other religious elements. Imagine a Torah scroll, which may take about a year to finish. Each scroll will have 245 columns, 304,805 letters, and they must be perfect. Otherwise, the Torah scroll cannot be used for religious purposes, and it may take about a year to complete. He did this work as a holy calling, never accepting money. My father described him as the gentlest man he had ever known, a true righteous person who imbued my mother with love, kindness, which she embodied all her life. Later, I saw some photos of Kristallnacht, and it broke my heart to see torched Torah scrolls. And I thank God that my grandfather did not live to see this. The Nazis began by burning Jewish prayer books and artifacts, then Torah scrolls, and ultimately burning Jews. Jews have been called the people of the book. Our Torah is our most sacred object, as the Quran is for Muslims, and of course, scriptures for Christians. And I was proud to learn about the Torah Project, which was headed up by my dear friend, Johnny Daniels. He found a Torah that had been hidden from the Nazis since 1939. Unfortunately, much of the Torah had been mutilated and destroyed over the years. And again, in Jewish practice, if a holy object is defaced in any way, it has to be buried. It has to have a ritual burial. But Johnny decided to bypass that, and instead he launched the Torah Project, which has him travel with this particular Torah, half of which was destroyed, and he is restoring it by having Holocaust survivors like me from around the world meet with him and inscribe their initials in that particular Torah, which, when it's finished, will be permanently housed in the home of the President of Israel. And this was the first time that I had the opportunity to have Johnny inscribe the letters Dalet Shin for David Solomon in that particular Torah. And you'll notice that I have my hand on Johnny's arm, and that signifies that I am actually inscribing those letters in that magnificent Torah. So let me get back to the story. Here are just a few shots about my family. My mother was born in 1904. My father was born in 1905. They were married in 1927. My mother was a beautiful woman, and here she's pictured with her cousin Lisa, who had immigrated to Israel. My parents were married in 1927, and I treasure the few photos that I have of her. Unfortunately, she had medical problems throughout her life, and she had to endure many, many medical processes and whatever. And she survived to a very short age of 52 years. My mother was, the only grandparent I had at that time was my maternal grandmother, Esther. She ran a small food counter in front of our house from which she sold eggs, cheese, milk, and other staples. Mondays, market days, were busiest when Polish people from surrounding villages came to trade, barter, sell, or buy products. She traveled every week to shop in Warsaw and always brought back a treat for my sister and for me, a cake or an orange or banana. And that was a very important treat in those days. Our town had a population of about 1,200 Jews and about 700 Polish people. The days were peaceful with everyone going about their business. Life was simple but difficult. Our home, like most others, was a wooden shack in which we ate, slept, and did everything we needed to. My only possession was a hand-me-down white rocking horse that I rode in front of our house. And when I saw the book that was created, and I saw on this page how Rebecca showed the image of me riding my rocking horse, it really was my first love. That horse was my first love. And what I noted that did not exist then was grass and shrubbery. There was nothing but mud on the streets of our little village. So I thought that Rebecca embellished on that very, very beautiful. God bless her. My father had no trade skills or work skills, but he was extremely well read, devouring every Jewish book he could find. He was not religious, but my mother and grandmother were observant. I often went to the local synagogue, a little synagogue. I didn't know any of the prayers, but I enjoyed watching the men praying and swaying, and I tried to sway with them and pretend that I was praying. And sitting near the dais, the rabbi always noted that I was there, and I was always treated to a nice little treat from the rabbi. My sister often read to me in Yiddish or Polish, Life went on day to day until Hitler invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. Stock was virtually destroyed on September 9th, and our family fled to the nearby forest. My father carried me wrapped in a maroon duvet, and from a distance we could see the town on fire as the Wehrmacht, the German soldiers, rolled in on their motorcycles, trucks, and horseback. Later, I found this incredible photograph taken by a German soldier of the Nazis, the Nazi armies, the Wehrmacht moving through our town. And that image was exactly what I had seen from a distance when we were hiding in the woods. And had we not fled when we did, this could have been me. And this is a photograph of a young boy who was in the Warsaw Ghetto when they were being rounded up to be shipped to their death. And I thank God that we were able to flee when we did. My grandmother heard that our little town was on fire and decided to go back and help if possible. And that was the last time we saw her. And we rue to this day that she was not able to come with us. We somehow had to leave, and we ended up in Białystok, about 70 miles from where we were, northeast of us. I don't know how we got there. Białystok at that time, as that entire white area, or area in white, shown in white, was occupied by the Soviets based on the Hitler-Nazi treaty. Before the war, Białystok had a population of about 50,000 Jews. When the war broke out, there were about 300,000 who fled to that area because it was much safer to be under Soviet control than under Nazi control. Joseph Stalin, one of the most notorious killers in history and a very violent anti-Semite, realized that he had a ready-made slave labor market. So he deported about 250,000 Jews, including our family, to a destination about which we knew nothing, the Komi region, the Komi Republic in the Soviet Union. The Republic Komi was just south of the Arctic Circle and just west of Siberia. And we were shipped to Syktyvkar, which was the capital of the Komi Republic. The need was to rebuild lumber factories and housing barracks. My father had no particular skills, but he became a glazer. And I just want to share with you a few photos of the local population. In many respects, they resembled the indigenous people in northern Canada and other areas. And there you see the kind of accommodation to which we were shipped, the barracks with the watchtowers. It was a horrible, horrible place. And we were housed in one of the barracks. It was with another couple named Mida. A hanging sheet separated the two families. Wooden planks served as beds. We had to burn peat or dried cow dung to keep warm. There was no sanitation, no heat, no toilets. We had to use outhouses. And when it's about minus 50 degrees in Syktyvkar, it's not a pleasant place to be. There was no running water or electricity. For light, we had to use kerosene lamps. Life was brutal, especially in winter, which seemed to last as long as 8 months. The barracks had no foundation. The place was overrun with huge rats, so we had to stay up at night. Someone had to stay up at night to beat them off. Many people, unfortunately, died from diseases, starvation, and freezing. The dead would be stripped of their clothes and anything that could be salvaged. Shoes were the most wanted items because the winters there were horrible. I had no shoes as a child. I had rags on my feet. Food was scarce, the only source being coupons earned by the workers. We had to line up for hours for some bread, some potatoes, and I had to scour through trash cans to see if I could find any bits of food or a weed called crapiva that was cooked like a spinach. That was our lifestyle in Syktyvkar. My father worked a few miles away, and I would bring him his lunch, usually a piece of bread, some watery soup, and whatever else was available. I had to cross fields and through a forest to get to him. The fear of wolves was ever present, as were attacks by locals. We had one long-term objective: survive today and hope to see tomorrow, and do the same again and again and again. The barracks had a long corridor which became the squatting place for those who did not have a room. One young squatter whom my father found was Moishe, the only son of my father's brother. So Moishe joined our family. The only thing of value that we had with us was the maroon duvet in which my father wrapped me on the way to the forest, and some silverware pieces, some fragile silverware from our parents' wedding. Moishe was the go-getter in the family. He always tried to find something that would be helpful to us. So he decided to trade some of the silverware pieces on the black market. And in return, he got a 22 karat, 5 ruble coin from the Soviet era. These were very precious and very valuable, and by the way, much, much smaller than the image that you see on the screen. Since I was a very curious young man, I would have had to talk about the coin, so it was sewn into a garment about which I didn't know, to protect me, because anyone who might have been found with one of these coins would have been in deep trouble. And that coin later became a very important part of our survival. On June 22nd, 1941, Hitler broke his treaty with Stalin and launched Operation Barbarossa. The Soviet Union is invaded by the Nazis, and Hitler's Einsatzgruppen, the groups that he used for killing purposes, unleashed their slaughter, aided by numerous locals. The Holocaust in the West and Poland was the Holocaust by gas, and here it became the Holocaust by bullets, and no Jews were to remain in the Ukraine. In fact, 600,000 were murdered there. One of the most horrible places was Babi Yar. There were many, many open pit murders such as this. On September 29th and 30th, 1941, almost 34,000 Jews were murdered in Babi Yar in front of open pits and just fell into those pits. Another horrible place in Mariupol, which, by the way, was one of the towns that was brutally invaded by Putin in 1922, when he attacked Ukraine, 2022, when he attacked the Ukraine. This is a photo of a beautiful family, a beautiful Jewish family in Mariupol, taken by a photographer from one of the adjacent countries, showing how they murdered this family by shooting them in the back of the heads. And if you'll notice the picture with a little boy, he's barefoot as the girl is. All the shoes had to be removed because the Nazis liked shoes more than Jews. And Deb very cleverly created the phrase souls, not souls. So you see in the middle the shoes of that little boy, and the shoes in Auschwitz, and the mounds of shoes that the Germans amassed. And at the Danube River in Budapest, when men and women were lined up in front of the river, shot in the back of their heads, and they tumbled into the river. So as the Soviet armies pushed the Germans out of Ukraine, there was a great need to start rebuilding the republic. So we were shipped from Syktyvkar to a village near Hyberon in Ukraine, a trip of about 2,000 miles in conditions similar to 1939. The task was to rebuild a destroyed sugar factory. We had a small room in the factory barracks. A nearby family, the Mogilas, were very, very kind to us, especially to my mother, often sharing their products. It has been said many, many times that no one survived the Holocaust without the help of someone else. The Mogilas were so very kind to all of us. My mother would not have survived were it not for this wonderful family. Mr. and Mrs. Mogila and their three daughters, just wonderful human beings. I went to school, as did my sister, and that blue arrow points to my rabbit fur cap. I was about 10 years old that time. The school was basically one room with several classes in it. Things were moving along well. We certainly were in a better place than we had been in Syktyvkar. At least there was better food, helped by the Mogila family. The one evening, my father was changing the kerosene lamp, which was near my cot. He dropped it. It burst into flames, and the straw mattress on which I was sleeping caught fire. I started screaming, of course, and it just so happened that my cot was near a window. Moishe heard the screams, opened the window, pulled me out, and I survived another day. The radio reports became more positive as the Soviet armies advanced through Poland and began a push to Germany. The war ended on May 7, 1945, and our next stage of life was to begin. The government said that any immigrants who did not wish to become Soviet citizens could leave as part of the International Refugee Organization. We left. Some returned to their birth towns where they were not welcome, resulting in killings by locals. So after a trip of about 2,000 miles through Czechoslovakia, Austria, the Soviet-controlled areas of Germany, such as Waldenburg, and spending some time in a tent camp during the heat of the summer, horrible place where everyone was sick, but we were reunited here with my mother's aunt and uncle and some of their cousins, so there was a little bit of joy to be had. And then we were shipped to Wetzlar in the US-controlled zone of West Germany. Wetzlar was famous for the Leica factory. Ernst Leitz invented the 35 millimeter camera, which was one of the main items in the Nazi propaganda. They took millions of photographs of all their atrocities. That's how the government was proud of what they were doing. And you can see a picture of the original factory and the anniversary of the 100th anniversary of the Leica, and it's shown as a spool of film. I don't think that is being used any longer, but it was in those days. Wetzlar was also famous or infamous for a huge Nazi training camp, SS training camp. And this is where we and about 4,200 other displaced persons were housed. And a picture of our family in Wetzlar. You can see how emaciated my mother looked, and my father, Moishe, and my sister and I think, came through it pretty well. And it was here that we began learning about the Holocaust for the very first time. You see, in the Soviet Union, there was absolutely nothing discussed or publicized on radio or in their newspapers about the Holocaust. That was part of the Soviet policy, not to disturb their locals. We met survivors for the first time. I saw the emaciated bodies, the tattoos on their arms. I held a bar of soap made of Jewish fat, inscribed with the Nazi logo, RJF, Reins Judenfett, pure Jewish fat. So I saw lampshades made of the skin of Jews. It was absolutely horrible. we were so horrified to see so much damage and so much hatred. And that was the first time we heard about it. And that's why I felt for much of my life that I really was not a Holocaust compared to those people. But we were starting a new life. There were weddings, children were born, schools were established. I went to a Hebrew school and I soon became quite fluent. There were games, there were tournaments, there were challenges. Things were starting to look pretty good. But what was going to be next? Where were we going to go from here? We had no idea. We couldn't get visas anywhere. We tried to get a visa to the US. My mother called her Uncle Sam. Nothing was done. We couldn't get anywhere. I went to school, and this shows you my class. I was sort of in the second row on the right side, and the uniform that I was given. And on May 14th, 1948, on a Friday, our teacher told us that we would gather around his desk and listen to a very special broadcast. And lo and behold, that afternoon, we heard David Ben-Gurion proclaim the declaration of the State of Israel. We were thrilled beyond words. It was Friday afternoon, so the welcoming of the Sabbath, the Kabbalat Shabbat that Friday was beyond anything that ever happened. And we thought perhaps we could go to, at that time, Israel, but we couldn't because unfortunately all the Arab nations around Israel decided to attack Israel the day that it was declared. So we kept on hoping that something good would come out. And again, my cousin Moishe was the go-getter. He met with the Canadian immigration folks, but nothing was happening. We were told that my sister and I and he could get a visa to Canada, but not my mother and father because of my mother's poor health. A family friend suggested that my sister and Moishe get married to see if that might improve our chances. So they obtained a bogus marriage certificate. There were no papers in those days. There were no passports. But that didn't work either later, by the way. They were married in Montreal. We heard that Canada was accepting a limited quota of tailors to work in Winnipeg, the growing garment industry, which was funded by Jewish manufacturers who petitioned the government to allow Jewish tailors to come to Canada. It was finally agreed to admit 2,500 immigrants, but only half were to be Jewish. So again, my father didn't know one end of a needle from another. How was he going to become a tailor? Well, a cousin of ours was a master tailor. So he took the test. He basted a seam like no one had ever seen before. So now we had a tailor certificate. So now Moishe, with a marriage certificate, with a tailor certificate, again met with the immigration officer. And this time with a little special gift, that beautiful little coin that we had from Syktyvkar. And that gold coin gave us a passport to the Golden Land. The journey was to happen at the end of the year. Before I get there, I want to show this particular image. Ernst Leitz, a devout German, of course, realized that his Jewish employees would be in danger. So he decided to create a means by which his Jewish employees would be sent to Leica factories around the world, to Leica offices. And this became called the greatest invention of the Leitz family, the Leica Freedom Train. He saved many, many Jews and is inscribed at Yad Vashem among the righteous, among the nations. God bless his memory. So we're off to Canada. We left Vetzlau, and this time we traveled in actual passenger train cars to Bremerhaven, and then we boarded the USS Samuel Davis Sturgis, an American Navy ship, and we set sail, if that's the appropriate term, for Canada. The trip occurred during Yom Kippur, so a synagogue was set up on board for those who wanted to observe that particular day. It occurred after Rosh Hashanah, after the New Year, which we determined not just a new year, but a new life. So we set sail for Canada. The journey was pretty rough. When we hit the Atlantic, it was cold and dark, and everyone on board was sick. And on the Sabbath, October 16th, we landed at Pier 21 in Halifax, where just about every boat with immigrants would come. And going through the museum, the immigration museum there, which was created by a dear friend of ours, I saw this sign. And when I was back in 2019 to speak in Halifax, that sign was still there. And what I found interesting, that it said welcome in 7 different languages, but it didn't have Hebrew in it. But I was consoled that there is actually Bruchim Habayim, welcome Jews, in a sign at the airport. The other thing that I noted that I found very, very special, very interesting, was this particular banner. It was there in 1948. It's still there. And I remember sort of falling in love with this beautiful person who suggested that we drink Coca-Cola. See, I thought the swirl on the L was a T. So I would have liked to drink Coca-Cola, but Coca-Cola cost 5 cents. The problem was I didn't even have 1 cent. But walking through the museum in 1939, or the immigration building, I should say, I found a bottle with a little brown liquid in it, and that was my first taste of Canada, thanking this lovely lady. And then at the museum, I saw an inscription on one of the walls, which really made me become a little emotional. It's a quote from one of my papers. I've been blessed well beyond my wildest dreams. I survived the Holocaust with my immediate family and built a new life in an extraordinary country, Canada. Whatever success I have achieved has been inspired and supported by family, friends, and business associates. And that was our arrival in Canada. And as they say, the rest is history. I would like to now take you to a visit to my hometown. I never wanted to return because there was no particular need for it. But when I realized that I became the only living survivor in 2021, I thought it's time that perhaps I get back to my town. And I was able to do it during my March of the Living journey on the way to Treblinka. Treblinka was one of the most horrendous Nazi death camps, 13 miles from our little town, where I always speak. But this time I said, I'll speak at our town and forego speaking at Treblinka. So the reason I wanted to do that, because there was a little cemetery that was created by Chasha Bardi. She was the only person who survived in our town during the war. She was hidden by a Polish family, or also inscribed in Yad Vashem among the righteous among the nations. And she arranged to come back to Poland from Israel with a Polish activist and arranged this little cemetery, actually right in the residential area. It's not much of a town, not much of a residential area. And they erected one memorial stone in memory of the victims from our town. It's in Yiddish and it's in Polish. And I thought it was just amazing for me to be able to come there. So imagine now 4 buses with 4 survivors, 124 17-year-old students, 20 chaperones, 2 rabbis, security people, et cetera, arriving in this little town that hasn't seen a Jew in about 80 years. And I had the privilege of speaking at Hasha's stone to the people gathered, to the ones gathered there. And when I finished, I was asked to step down and pull a sheet away from something. I didn't know what was there. And lo and behold, there was a commemorative stone right beside the homes of the Polish people. And I had an absolute meltdown because that stone was created, it was actually created by the local funeral director, a wonderful Polish person. It's the only place you could get that. And that stone is in memory of the Jews of Stoczek and the 6 million Jews who were brutally murdered in the Holocaust by the German Nazis and their collaborators. We will never forget them. The stone is laid in honor of the family of Sol Nayman. Nothing in my life was as emotional as that. So much so that later on another journey, I was able to get my beloved Queenie with me. It happened to me in the evening at that stone. So never say when something wonderful will happen to you. You never know. It could be in the next second, as it was for me then. So let me share with you some comments about the critical needs for Holocaust education. Holocaust education is unfortunately not very well known in many, many places around this world. It's not memorizing that Hitler killed 6 million Jews. It's understanding how one person can start it with words and that words matter. Understanding how millions of ordinary German citizens were convinced that it was required. It is how countless nations and millions of people were indifferent bystanders. And we see that all over the world. We've seen it in the Hamas war, we've seen it everywhere. It is learning how to spot the signs of history repeating and doing something to stop the repeat. One of the critical things about the Holocaust, like anything else, is beware of the beginning. If it's not stopped at the start, it just grows and grows and grows. I've often been asked, how can one process the extermination of 6 million people? It can be defined. It's not a number. It can be imagined. But here's a thought. If we held a minute of silence for every Holocaust survivor, we would be silent for 11 and a half years. The Holocaust generally is considered to have been a period between 1939 and 1945, but it began much earlier. For example, in 1919, Hitler sent a letter to Gemlich, a soldier. This letter, by the way, the original letter is in the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum, a priceless, priceless piece. And in this letter, he clearly says that Jews cannot be defined, Jews have to be eliminated. And then in 1925, and here are the roots of the Holocaust. In 1925, when Hitler was imprisoned, he wrote his books, Mein Kampf, clearly indicating that he was going to destroy every Jew around the world. In 1933, when he assumed power, then in 1935, the Nuremberg laws, during which Jews were denied any of their citizenship rights, their businesses were confiscated, etc. And the 1938 Kristallnacht, which we will be commemorating in a couple of days. Kristallnacht, during which time thousands of Jews were murdered, hundreds of synagogues were destroyed, and as I showed, Torah scrolls were torched and Jews were torched. And then, of course, the invasion of Poland, the final solution during which the Nazis clearly created a path to create the 6 death camps and the murder of millions of people. And of course, finally, the war ending. Hitler had many partners. For example, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, he controlled the Muslim population in the Middle East. He clearly sided with Hitler, and he was going to eliminate every Jew in the Middle East, just as Hamas has tried to do recently. But thank God it didn't happen. And by the way, he was going to be tried with the others in Nuremberg trials, but he disappeared. The Holocaust was meticulously planned. I don't want to go through the detail because it's very time consuming. But Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks said so clearly, the Holocaust does not define what it is to be a Jew. It defines what it is to be a human. And His Holiness Pope Francis said the Holocaust education is needed to recover our humanity. Attacks on Jews are anti-Semitism, as are attacks on Israel. Very, very beautifully said. So, what can we do to achieve greater awareness? I think we can see what happened with the Abraham Accords, during which mutual recognition and peace between Israel, the Arab Emirates, Sudan, and Morocco were created for the very first time. It opened the skies and the borders and trade and commerce and education between all these Middle East countries. And those were supposed to be steps towards peace in the Middle East. Unfortunately, Iran did not see fit that that should be happening. And that's when they convinced their proxies to attack Israel. We also had notification that negotiations were going on with Saudi Arabia that would have linked the most important Muslim country with the Abraham Accords. But again, Iran saw fit to disturb that. And hopefully this will happen soon, that Saudi Arabia will join the family. Now, no education will eradicate the longest lasting inequality in history, anti-Semitism, which led to genocide and all kinds of other attacks. But education can prevent the recurrence and must include lessons about other genocides. Genocide is a crime without a name, as was coined by Winston Churchill. It was a new term, a complete new conception for destruction of nations. The United Nations lists 50 genocides, 15 since the Holocaust, which was the genocide of all genocides. US President Biden finally declared the massacre of Armenians by Turkey as genocide. And this is how the United States Holocaust Museum defines genocide: killing members of a specific group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, inflicting on the whole or part conditions to bring about physical destruction, measures to prevent birth within the group, and forcibly transferring children from the group to another, as happened unfortunately in so many of the schools of the in the indigenous people's schools across Canada years and years ago. Horrible times. We need people to raise their voices. We can't have innocent bystanders, as Anne Frank did when she wrote her wonderful book, her diary, which was written in Dutch and later translated into English and 62 other languages, and served as a vital lesson of the Holocaust. And Malala Yousafzai, a lovely, lovely girl at age 15, was shot by the Taliban in Pakistan for daring to raise her voice in a blog about the importance of education for girls. She survived and became the youngest person to have been awarded Canadian citizenship and a wonderful Nobel Prize. Nadia Murad, a Zaidi from Iraq rather, at age 11 was captured and tortured and raped by ISIS. She managed to escape and became a noted human rights voice and was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. Viola Desmond raised her voice in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. She challenged racial segregation by refusing to leave a whites-only area in a movie house. So a night at the movies ended as a night in prison, but she won her case, which led to progressive emancipation of Black communities in Nova Scotia and elsewhere. She also graces our $10 bill. And Professor Irwin Cotler, one of the most eminent members of parliament from Canada. He was Minister of Justice for many years and an outspoken about human rights, heads up the Raoul Wallenberg Institute across the world. We were with him last week. What an incredible human being and a dear friend of mine, and I'm proud to be associated with him. And it just so happens that Michal Kotler-Wunsch and Deborah Lyons were with me on the March of Living and with me at Treblinka. And they are respectively ambassadors for Israel and Canada in spreading Holocaust education around the world. And great American patriot, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, was appointed as the American ambassador to combat anti-Semitism. We hope that they will prevail. The most, I think we can skip that. The most violent anti-Semitism has occurred since October 7th. Has been given a green light after that by the Iran proxies of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. But there are so many people who speak out against the Holocaust and still so many who profess Holocaust denial. And this picture to me is something that is beyond belief. Here's a group of young men, I think they're listed as Proud Boys, who deny the Holocaust ever existed, but are happy to wear a t-shirt that shows 6MWE, which simply means 6 million were not enough. On one hand, the Holocaust didn't exist. On the other hand, 6 million were not enough. Horrible. Fareed Zakaria, one of the most prominent journalists in the world, had once said that anti-Semitism spread throughout the Islamic world like a cancer. And many Islamic nations to this day consider the Holocaust to have been a hoax. But Mohammed al-Isa, who was a former justice minister of Saudi Arabia, after visiting Auschwitz, said to his co-religionists, I urge all Muslims to learn the history of the Shoah, to visit memorials and museums of this horrific event, and to teach its lesson to their children. What a powerful statement, and I hope his co-religionists will listen and perform accordingly. This is a wonderful group that was created in Canada, the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, the first global all-Muslim group solely dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism. And I'm proud that my dear friend Rahil Raza is one of the most prominent members of this group. She writes always about the horrible things that are being committed by her co-religionists. She's very critical of the hatred that so many of her fellow Muslim groups have created. And my dear friend Imam Tawhidi, he's known as the Imam of Peace. He also speaks the truth, while so many others don't. And recently, he absolutely condemned Yahya Sinwar, who was the mastermind of the October 7th attack on Israel. Here, Yahya Sinwar is shown with his 5-year-old son. And what is he doing? He's holding a machine gun. And that is just absolutely horrible. And the Imam condemned that after Sinwar was finally eliminated. And unfortunately, he was the real sticking point in all the negotiations about releasing the hostages and concurrently releasing many of those who were held in Israeli jails. So, where do we go from here? It's impossible to imagine. And again, how do we end anti Semitism? As Rabbi Sachs said, anti Semitism endangers everyone because the hate of Jews did not begin with Jews and can only end when non Jews decide to end it. And evil happens when people let it happen. And our best defense against it is never to forget where it leads. After liberation, I started really studying the Holocaust. I returned to Poland to become a witness. And no matter what I read, and there were about 16,000 books that have been published about the Holocaust, nothing prepared me for being in Auschwitz and standing under this horrible gate with the sign, Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free. And I want you to note the B, the third letter from the left, the inverted B. That was inverted on purpose by the prisoners in Auschwitz who worked on that sign, simply to show a little bit of a rebellion against the Nazis. And then visiting Birkenau, it's beyond belief. I've been there 7 times and I still have not seen it from end to end. 470 acres, that's like 500 football fields developed for one purpose only, to destroy, to murder as many Jews as possible. And over 1 million Jews were murdered in the Birkenau gas chambers and crematoria. And just a few reflections of the death marches. They're to commemorate the death marches in Auschwitz on January, 9 days before Auschwitz was liberated. 50,000 Jewish prisoners were sent on a death march in the coldest of winter without proper clothing, without food. The majority of them died en route. And this is what the March of Living looks like. And here I am with 9 of our survivors from Toronto. Unfortunately, 3 of the people in that lineup have passed away. And being with Michal Wunsch-Kotler, who asked to have the honor of marching with me from Auschwitz to Birkenau. What a great honor it was for me. And this is what it looked like. You could see a sea of 10,000 people from around 40 countries marching the 2.5-mile route from Auschwitz to Birkenau. And then at the closing ceremony, we gather with other survivors. About 50 survivors from around the world are there. And we stand tall and proud as we sing Hatikva, the Jewish national anthem, at the biggest graveyard in the world. And exactly 1 week later, as we march from the center of Jerusalem to the holiest site in Judaism, the Western Wall, again, where we stand to sing Hatikva. Every survivor is asked to speak at a spot that they prefer. Mine, of course, is Treblinka, my neighborhood death camp. And here I was in 2016 with my grandson, and between us, my granddaughters at that time, my twins, went in 2012, but I couldn't go with them because they said I'm too emotional. But when my grandson decided to go in 2016, I said I'm going with him and let my emotions emote. And I speak there whatever time of day, whatever. And in 2019, I had the privilege of having Queenie with me at our town stone. Treblinka was totally destroyed. There was nothing left as it was turned over to Ukrainians to create a farm. But there were about 17,000 stones that were erected there to commemorate what a daily killing could be, as well as about 700 stones from different towns. This, of course, is a stone from our town, where I always go to recite a prayer. In 2019, I returned for a second time with another group. It was a miserable day. It poured cats and dogs all day and all night. But just as I was finishing my remarks, lo and behold, at the town where I was speaking, there was a massive rainbow over Treblinka. How unbelievable is that? To me, it was a sign from heaven. Just as we read this past Sabbath in the chapter about Noah and the ark and the 40 days of rain, and finally a rainbow. I just broke down when I saw that. And there you see that rainbow over my shoulder. Before I leave Treblinka, I always say a silent prayer. I thank God for not turning me into the ashes in Treblinka, because that's where I would have been had we not fled when we did. There's also another stone that I always visit, and that is the stone to commemorate Janusz Korczak, Henry Goldsmith. He ran a school for orphans in Warsaw. He had 192 orphans under his care, and he was one of the most highly regarded teachers in the world when it had to do with young children. And he was offered opportunities anywhere and everywhere. He was told to assemble his children, and he knew what was going to happen. And friends of his said, "We can save you. We know what's going to happen." He said, "No, no, 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 no. I'm going with my children." He had them all dressed in their finery, with their toys, with their banners, and lined them up at Umschlagplatz, which was the gathering place in Warsaw. And from the Umschlagplatz, they were shipped to Auschwitz, to Treblinka, and they were murdered in Treblinka, 192 of them. And the stone simply reads, Janusz Korczak I dzieci, Janusz Korczak and the children. What a horrible, horrible memento that is. As Golda Meir said, we not only believe in miracles, we depend on them. And I want to share with you a miracle of Kristallnacht's 80th anniversary. The chief rabbi, the president of Germany rather, met with the chief rabbi and asked him, what can we do to commemorate the Holocaust, which was to occur a few days away? So they decided to do something at the Brandenburg Gate, which was Hitler's pride and joy. And here you see what it looked like in 1939 to 45, the festoons with the Nazi flags and the swastikas. And they decided to erect the biggest Hanukkah menorah in front of the Brandenburg Gate as it looks now. Can you imagine that? At Hitler's favorite spot, an incredible Jewish symbol commemorating the Festival of Lights, which enhanced the world for 8 days. I consider that to be a miracle, as I do these elements. On my visit to the March of Living this year in Israel, which was a very heart-wrenching visit with rockets being fired, with sirens going off, I was asked to join a small group of Holocaust survivors to have our initials inscribed in a Torah that was then presented to the Jewish defense, to the IDF, the Jewish Defense Forces. I had a little breakdown there, as you can see. And then I was given the honor of carrying the Torah on the way from Auschwitz to Treblinka. What a beautiful, beautiful to Birkenau, to Birkenau. And then meeting, as in this case, the father of a released hostage, father of Emily Hand. What a privilege it was for us to meet someone like that. And then we went to the Nova Memorial. That's where on October 7th, hundreds and hundreds of beautiful young people from all over the world came to celebrate life, came to dance, came to enjoy the air, came to be together, came to show love. And unfortunately, they were murdered in the time of several hours. So this memorial has been erected in memory of everyone who was killed on that day. And we adopted this beautiful young person in Bar Shem Tov, one of the participants on that day. We adopted her as a special granddaughter for whom we will recite appropriate prayers when that is appropriately done. And again, at the Nova Festival, the Nova Memorial, this young man was inscribing a Torah to commemorate the memory of the Nova participants. And I had the privilege again of having my initials, which are my grandfather's initials, inscribed on this particular Torah. And it just so happened that we were there on May 12th, which happens to be Mother's Day and Queenie's birthday. We were at the JNF Park, one of the JNF Jewish National Fund parks, where 250 million trees have been planted in a land that was barren desert. And I had the privilege of planting a tree on Queenie's birthday. May it grow forever. So the Nazis had a final solution to eradicate every Jew around the world. Our final solution is never again, means never again. I want to close with a couple of quotes. Henry Appel was a survivor of Auschwitz, and he said that there's only one thing worse than Auschwitz itself, and that is if the world forgets there was such a place. And I felt compelled to just change a word in there. There's only one thing worse than the Holocaust, and that is the world forgets that it happened. Let us never, ever, ever forget the Holocaust and other atrocities around the world. And I thank you for your kind attention. So I'm going to close my screen, unless it should stay on. I can close my share. The reason I have Queenie beside me is because she knows what to do. And there we are, Jessica and I.
Thank you,
Ted,
Saul.
you have the final word here.
That was amazing. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being so transparent. And thank you for being you.
Thank you so much. And just by the way, I'm wearing the hoodie that we wore this year, and it reads, "We will dance again." We will not stop because of what happened at Nova. We will dance again. So thank you for your kind attention. And Jessica, thank you for being here. And thank you for bringing our words to all the wonderful people that you represent. And I don't know if I should close with this, but I will. It just so happens that Queenie and I have a granddaughter, one of the twins, who at the age of about 20 months was stricken with pneumococcal meningitis, and she lost her hearing. And at the age of 22 months, she was the youngest child to be implanted with a cochlear implant and subsequently received 2 implants, second implant. Lauren will be 30 years old in January. She has a degree in architecture. She studied engineering, civil engineering, and she works for one of the top architecture firms in Canada. She is totally deaf, but she can hear as well as any one of us, speaks as clearly and as eloquently as any one of us, and she has spent many, many times speaking to other children to tell them what wonderful achievements they can have by just being the best they can be and how they can persevere without hearing. So, Jessica, I thought that might be of particular interest to you. And I wish Lauren was with us here because she is much more eloquent than I am and almost as beautiful as my wife. And I do like to say facetiously at times that Queenie is the real survivor in our family because she has put up with me for 63 years. So I will sign off and thank you for being so patient and listening to me. And as Deb said at the outset, if there's an opportunity to meet for a Q&A, I'd be more than happy to do that. And if we do that, what I would recommend is that all the questions be sent to Deb, and I should have at least a little time to read them, and then we can speak about them at a session. So thank you all. God bless you all. You have an incoming new president or a, a president in the US. We hope the US is blessed with peace and tranquility and great achievement. We love you all, and we hope to see you all again soon. And I guess I can sign out. Thank you all.